Welcome to Animal Punditry, the international relations podcast with a trough of takes on topics you might care about. I'm Eric.
I'm James.
So there's been some interesting developments considering the Ukrainian invasion has maybe not gone exactly the way that Putin had envisioned. And we're going to explore that momentarily here. In previous episodes, we had discussed the timeline in which Russia would need to take Kyiv or else they would be in some serious trouble. Well, turns out they have reevaluated the strategy, at least for now, focused east, basically left trying to take Kyiv perhaps for the rest of this conflict, or they'll get back to it later. But for the time being, it seems like they're consolidating what they've achieved in the east and finishing that off. Even which may not be successful because it is Good Friday at 3:30, and we learned that the Ukrainian or Russian vessel, the Moskva, got sunk by a Ukrainian rocket launch. So Ukraine's been able to deal some blows here, and so what everyone or most people thought would be just like an absolute steamroll has turned out to not necessarily be the case in this conflict, which is a welcome state of affairs right now.
Yeah, I think that we do need to be always careful in our predictions and forecasting, because if you'll go back to our very first episode when we talked about Russia and their initial first 100 missile strikes, they were all over the country, right? And so you got to be careful on the forecasting, and also just in terms of how people would spin different commentaries. So if Russia comes out of this and does kind of take over a large part of the east and stuff, including like the Donbass region, and really consolidates control there, then it's going to be, oh, Putin's such a mastermind. He distracted all of us with Kyiv, and then he went for the gut punch and really took control of what he really wanted. He asked for the farm and bought the horse, like from Django, So, I do like we do got to be like a little bit careful. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely been like a slog. We've known that in the springtime, the Ukrainian just regular land gets very marshy and muddy. It makes it more difficult to go off of road. And so in terms of like logistics, any other support, and just movement of troops, artillery, that Ukraine special forces and just have been able to use, especially utilizing like US Stingers, which are like missiles that you can pretty much carry on your shoulder that can take down heavy artillery like tanks. They've been able to use those types of things to really attack the Russian forces. So, but yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. I feel like the past couple of like wars or big world events, and like the 20th and 21st century, it's always like, oh, we'll be home by Christmas. Like this will be a quick war, and then it's like, oh shit, 4 years have gone by. Whoops, might be.
Where did this decade go? Yeah, absolutely. There is certainly, it appears to be a grave miscalculation by Putin, or as we go, to reference another thing prior to invasion happening, is when he had that cabinet meeting where he shook down all of his ministers, and his head of foreign intelligence was shaking in his boots. He might have just been fed what he wanted to hear over and over and over again, which led to this, what seemed to be an attainable dream, into, oh, we didn't know that we may not be able to do as much as we want to. The enemy may be stronger than we assumed, and we definitely underestimated global reaction. We thought we could do another Georgia, but it is 14 years later, and it is a very different context. And so, yeah, it seems like there's been a harsh dose of reality that's come down to Putin, or at least he is finally went from what an idealized version of what could happen to what has actually happened, and then has thus reestablished. And if I am to forecast one thing, I think the more likely thing is, at least for the near to medium term, is that consolidation of control in the eastern part of Ukraine. They aren't just going to concede any ground like that. It's already seemed like quite the failure. So to actually quote unquote give up, or something that could be seen as giving up or surrendering, I just don't see the Russians doing anytime soon.
I will say it's kind of nice to see other countries struggle with some things that we struggle here in the U.S., specifically, intelligence failures, right? I'm sure people will kind of like remember the Iraq WMD intelligence failure we had in 2003, where it was a little bit of a mix of politicization in the process, disagreement and footnote wars among different intelligence agencies. And yeah, it happens in other countries too. Putin thought there was a Nazi genocide going on. Whoops. It's not there.
What a terrible result of the game of telephone, right?
All right, to be fair, all right, so like it wasn't that, but the real intelligence failure over there is just, it's a military overestimation, like on their part. It's as Nick Saban would say, they were fed rat poison, so you gotta. Yeah.
I can't say that I have all of Nick Saban's Nick Saban isms.
Yeah, it's because you're a Big Ten guy. You'll play pretty much Canadian football up there. It's not even.
Yeah, and we're polite, so we lose like it too. As a Wisconsin fan, I can say that because we at least know we're probably going to lose. We'll get decently far and then lose. Unlike Ohio State, that will actually like get far but then lose. I don't know what's more disappointing. Anyway, but so I heard an interesting take on, I believe it was Preet Bharara's podcast. His guest mentioned that the developments in Ukraine could be good news for Taiwan. There's been a lot of comparing in the international affairs zeitgeist of mainstream media, yada, yada, yada. That was basically like, okay, basically Russia is going to directly impose military force and take Ukraine. Basically, that's analogous to China taking Taiwan by military force. And that's been the conversation for a while now. And while I think there is some merit to that, there's some pretty important differences to the Taiwanese-Chinese relationship and the Ukrainian-Russian relationship, especially for those that are outside those relationships. So everyone basically recognized the sovereignty of Ukraine, which is very much in favor of Ukraine having global sympathy and being able to punish Russia without any sort of not that much hesitation, and people feel like they can comfortably support Ukraine, whereas a lot less people recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation, and it would be a lot more difficult for countries to impose sanctions and disentangle their economy from China, and Chinese investments a lot more enticing than what Russia has to offer. So I'm wondering if you think that these developments in Ukraine could be considered as very good news for Ukraine, or if there should be an asterisk on that.
I mean, I think in this situation, like details matter so much. You can kind of take apart different parts of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and then apply it over to potential China-Taiwan conflict. And some things will stick as good news, I guess. Some things will stick as bad news, and some things will stick as we don't even know, this isn't very applicable at all. I think at like a high level in terms of like American engagement in the war in the world, this would be good news. So like high level meaning like, you know, top State Department officials like reassuring top like Taiwanese officials, different things like that. I would imagine there's a level of covert support, and also the level of like intelligence collection on plans and intentions on Russia from the U.S. and NATO allies, pretty much just calling out like, oh, like this is going to happen in the next 48 hours. Like that was, I mean, that's awesome, right? Obviously, you don't have the same assets in China as you would in Russia, but that the fact that you were able to like garner that type of intelligence in a very like internal with a state with a very strong internal security force, that's good news if you're Taiwan. Um, like the amount of covert action in terms of like moving weapons and different things like that to Ukraine, that's also good news for Taiwan. Like you said, sanctions. You know, that's a whole different ballgame when you're coming up to when you're going to start talking about China and the different sanctions that they put. It seems that since this was such a clear infringement on sovereignty, which again you don't have on Taiwan, then there was kind of that rallying effect that you have. So I don't think you can really say the same thing with Taiwan, but with these different situations, like you can just adapt the plan. So you always look at the four major like areas that you can like use resources in, called DIME. So that's diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economic. So you just try and take a mix of the four of those and apply it to different spots, or apply it to its situation in different ways. So maybe you would rely more on like a diplomacy, intelligence, and military thing, where in Ukraine we've seen very much like an economic boon. One thing I will say that's probably bad news no matter what, is the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. The fact that the Russians kept firing on civilians trying to evacuate in clear, like delineated zones of evacuation, that they bombed a train station that left, I think, like 30 something people dead. Like the civilian casualties and the casualty to the overall economic casualty to Ukraine, their GDP is projected to lose 45% of its value this year, which is just insane. So even when they get out on the other side of this, they're going to need a ton of aid to get back to even just half of the way things were, right? So that's not great news for them at all. So I mean, and how are you going to hold, or right now, like that's the question, how are you going to hold Russia accountable for these humanitarian crises? And my best bet is that our countries are just gonna throw it into the international court system, and 40 years down the road we'll get a verdict and it'll be symbolic, and China will look at that symbolism and go, we don't give a shit. And so if they ever do decide to infringe on Taiwan, which I'm just going to call Taiwan sovereignty, because I think they hold a monopoly of force over Taiwan, and I'm going to count that as sovereignty for them. And they like elect their own government and stuff. So to me, I think they're like have proved that they're a country. But when China infringes on that sovereignty, I don't think they're going to give two shits on any humanitarian situation there. They're going to like oppress the fuck out of it. You're going to see, Hong Kong on steroids in terms of, cracking down on any dissent at all. So yeah. Well, bits and pieces of good news and bad news, Eric.
Nice. Thank you for that. I echo most, if not all, of what you say there. It's definitely the PR for Russia has been awful, of course. And so that might send some Chinese Communist Party officials to reevaluate that a smidgen. But also the complete impunity in which Russia's been able to act without people directly getting involved means that other countries are going to be the propensity to get involved in a conflict in Taiwan's even less than those that want to get involved in Ukraine. And so that's bad news. for sure. There's no domestic pushback that Ukrainians can do. So that has been shown so far in the ways things that have played out that can mean that China would want to be deterred, like they've quote like learned a lesson from Russia in Ukraine. Like this venture's proved that if you can bear the weight of the economic global force, which will be invoked more so on Russia than China, then you can act with impunity. And so if you're determined enough, you can go for it. And so I am curious if they will be as overt militarily as they are like from like an intelligence economic type of integration and like governmental coercion like they did in Hong Kong in passing some of the legislation that was like the school teaching and Mandarin rules. So yeah, I'm curious if it will reevaluate their strategy in a less or more militaristic way. But I thought that was quite interesting.
Shall we move on to Pakistan, or do you have any closing thoughts on Russia, Ukraine?
I'm just amazed at how things have gone in Ukraine so far. Maybe more so on, I don't know what to be impressed more by, Ukrainian resilience or Russian blunders. Maybe they have equal weight for me, but looking forward to hoping that Ukrainians just succeed in some way or another. I don't know what metrics we use for that, but it's a terrible situation, of course, but something that's developed in a seemingly positive way. But as we've mentioned throughout the episode so far, is that we can't jump to any conclusions about how things will play out in the long run.
But I got a big forecast. I bet you we're going to get a Netflix documentary on this. So that's my big forecast for this show.
Bold, so daring. So if you were happen to be paying attention, catch it. The Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan got the boot after he tried to dissolve parliament. So that is something that continued the trend of Pakistani prime ministers not filling their entire 5-year term, which to date, Pakistan as a nation after the partition with India has not happened. Some have been close. Some have been in the 4-year, like 230-day mark, if I recall correctly, but they didn't quite make it. So Imran Khan actually made it pretty far. I just will check real quick.
3 years and some change, I think, right?
Nearly 4 years. Yep. So nearly 4 years. I think he was doing decently well, but I think what maybe over time, what caught him was he really pivoted to China and now basically met the West with hostility. That didn't guarantee what happened to him politically, because of course, if that's being prime minister of Pakistan is like one of the most fraught positions ever. But they took on a lot of sovereign debt pivoting to China, and inflation is really bad. And so the economic strength and foundation, or I guess maybe what he had under his feet is really shaky. And so that didn't help him politically. And then some of the other things he was doing weren't quite up to snuff.
Just a couple statistics for you. So their inflation under Khan rose from 5.1% to 12.7%. And their external debt grew from 95 billion to 130 billion in 3 years.
Yeah, that is significant, and that does not play well politically. That's for sure. From just an average person's sense, even if you thought that his ideological positions were pretty good, it's hard to garner political favor when you seem to have brought on some of those economic woes yourself.
And I'm sure like COVID didn't help either.
COVID did not help. I think another thing that may have hurt him politically was that India seemed to grow and ascend on the world stage during that same time period that Khan was in office. And so whenever I think about Pakistan, I like to always keep India in mind. They have, have a long relationship, one that is contentious, maybe one of the most contentious neighborly relationships in the world, in that they share so much border, especially. So,
And I know there was like there's kind of a personal beef, for lack of a better word, between Khan and Prime Minister Modi of India. And I believe Khan blocked trade from India as well. So that doesn't help.
Khan had a nice cricket hit, bat at their annual border cricket game, which I don't know if that actually exists. But if you all don't know, even former Prime Minister Imran Khan was a professional cricket player. Utilized that popularity and fame to ascend politically. Interesting play. And I guess he thought his success in cricket could translate to success in politics, which was not necessarily wrong per se, but it didn't play out super well due to some of the aforementioned blunders.
I do love he followed the classic populist right jab, left jab, right uppercut of when things start to go bad. Get all your opponents together. Fuck them. They're all rats, and it's their fault. If that doesn't work, go attack the courts. The court's fault, clearly. And then when all else fails, fuck America, and America was always the one behind all of the problems. Yeah, that was. I love it. Classic pop. It's been the trope for years.
Yeah, Khan was definitely riding that authoritarian populist wave there.
Well, he was kind of in the same class too. Like when he was elected, like I think Trump was elected in 2016, and then I think him, Bolsonaro, and AMLO in Mexico were all they all kind of came up together, and it was that very populist, like not technically authoritarian, but like that strong man type of like thing they were trying to give off.
Yeah, absolutely. I am curious as to when Khan saw blood in the water, and because clearly, like trying to throw Hail Marys, like dissolving Parliament, that the end is nigh, and he is basically finished, and so might as well try this thing that will definitely not work, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah. He was pretty much propped up by the army, by the military, and then once they lost confidence in him, it was pretty much, that was it.
Yeah, that's a really good.
Don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Absolutely, that's a really good transition into the cyclical political state in Pakistan. And I don't know if people have seen the Rules for Dictators video by CGP Grey. It's pretty wonderful, and explores some of these power dynamics in a nice way, but in sometimes cheeky way. And so Pakistan is one of those countries that really illustrates the military establishment and political establishment dynamic really well, in that military, if the military doesn't like what you're doing, they will off you. I mean, maybe literally, probably, but definitely politically. And the Pakistani intelligence service is one of, I feel like if you asked a US diplomat from like the mid 2000s about their time working in Afghanistan, and you bring up the ISI, they'll just like, that might be triggering, because it's Pakistan's has interest in Afghanistan, maintaining somewhat of a Islamist politique, I guess. And India will mess with them sometimes with Pakistan. And So the Taliban works well as a kind of a natural-ish partner for Pakistan. And obviously the US did not like the Taliban as the main political force in Afghanistan. So the US and ISI have had an interesting dynamic where like ISI will collaborate sometimes and other times ISI will do what they need to do, even if it comes at the cost of what the US wants to do. And some of this is illustrated by like Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan.
In like a nice mansion. Right next to their war college.
Oh, so Pakistan.
That would be like Pakistan. Like if there was like somebody, I don't know, hiding out in Navy Yard of DC at the Nat Stadium, right next to the National War College, and Pakistan was like, "Hey, is that person there?" And we're like, "No, I don't know what to tell you."
Don't know what you're talking about.
Can you at least like search like some of the nicer residencies? Yeah, no, they're not here.
Oh. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about Pakistan?
No, that pretty much did it. It's just a quick reminder that don't use democracy as a buzzword. It's a very, very difficult thing to have a successful democracy. It also ebbs and flows. But yeah, you know, I think one thing that you look at this, technically it was a constitutional process. Parliamentary had a no confidence vote, and that's what actually ousted Khan. So it wasn't a coup or anything. So that's nice. Technically, it was a peaceful transition of power. So to win, hey,
that's all we can ever hope for, I guess.
I mean, if it's within the rules of the democracy, isn't that how it's supposed to work?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody has different flavors of democracy. I also, just real quick, democracy is a buzzword. You know who calls themselves a democracy technically is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Good old North Korea and Kim Jong-un. So
he's just so popular. He polls so well.
Dude, he like won like 99% of the votes.
It's incredible.
God bless that 1%. They're probably dead.
It's a 1% that shrinks every year. And yeah, I feel like there's some political case studies that need to be done to figure out what exactly is the secret to 99% popularity.
Being really good at golf is what his dad would say.
He learned it from his dad. Kim Jong-il plays 18 holes, scores 18. It's incredible. Truly incredible. Why the pro circuit's beneath him, you know. I don't want Spieth or anyone to just be embarrassed, you know. They would be sharing the course with an icon. So this week in history, it is Good Friday. Last Sunday was Passover, or Palm Sunday, sorry. And this upcoming Sunday is Easter. So pretty significant events in the context of global history, and that our calendars are reflected by this time, this period.
The birth of Christ.
Birth of Christ. And so,
except it's like plus or minus. We have like a 3-year spread. They're like, well, it could be like 3 BC or 3 AD, but like we're just gonna go in the middle, 0 AD.
You know, even back then, you know, they're trying to do statistical modeling, figure out exactly when something was, but there's error you need to account for. But they found an estimate they're confident with and went for it, you know. As someone who does economics for his day job, that's all I can ever hope for, that's for sure. But back to religion. So religion in the context of international affairs is really interesting because it is something that is manifests at the very domestic level and has and very much can dictate domestic politics, which then integrates itself into how nations interact with one another. An example of that is Ishmael I of Persia, they were largely Zoroastrian. They had like a few different things going on, but they were still Islamic. But the Ottoman Empire was growing and encroaching to the east, and so in order for him to consolidate power and decrease the like almost like religious tie to the Ottoman Empire. Hence, you get Shia Islam in Persia. All he had to do was just kill some educated people, and then you have a national theocratic transition. And so then, and to this day, we have Shia identity in Iran, and Shia dictates Iran's foreign policy. So and then to continue on a little bit further, monarchs used religion as legitimacy of their power. You have basically until the fall of Russian monarchy, you have them deriving their appointment by divine sources. So religion it seems like as you go look in history and continue to go back further and further and further and further, it plays this very fascinating role that seems to be somewhat consistent over the centuries, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing,
Yeah, it's given us some good, it's given us some pretty good, geopolitical case studies. So that's nice. It's offered different interpretations of what just war is as well.
Something that's interesting is that I looked into the countries with the most religions by follower count, and so you have like 2.3 billion Christians. This is according to Pew in 2015. 1.8 billion practicing Islam. And then you have 1.2 unaffiliated. Would you like to guess where the majority of those people lie?
The unaffiliated?
Yeah.
Asia, just because Asia's massive.
You are right. Yeah. So I believe China makes up about half. There are about like 500 to 600 million Chinese that are religiously unaffiliated. And then of course,
good old communism stamping out religion did a pretty good job in China. Still holding out.
It is really interesting the difference between when philosophy can become almost religion-like and like where it can split. And it feels like late 1700s, early 1800s, you start to get this dynamic of like countries taking on philosophical theories as part of their own identity, and that has largely come in the form of an economic system and trying to create that, where you have obviously Marxism is the first one that comes to mind for everybody, and then you have things like Pol Pot in Cambodia is trying to start year zero and starting the country over to create like the perfect communist system.
How'd it work out?
It didn't work out great. Yeah, they recognize 2022 as the current year. It is not, what would it be, like year 60 of the Pol Pot regime. So there's been some blurring of the lines of where I suppose maybe Confucianism could be considered as somewhat of like a almost there, but as this trend of the world getting kind of less affiliated with religion, largely, and it seems like Christian countries, at least for the time being, it'll be interesting how that plays out in like the geologic time scale, right? Because we won't be alive long enough to see some of these greater trends as they evolve. We'll see like glimpses of something like some places becoming less religious, and clearly that can affect how they engage with the world. Like the Baltic states are some of the least religious in the world, and so and then they join NATO. So does that mean that they believe in the devil? But anyway, so
what?
No, it's worse. They don't even care that whether or not the devil exists. So it's something that is significant in a culture's identity or area's identity, and how that can drive political dynamics. So yeah, Ham's beer is great. As per usual, we are sponsored by Ham's beer. Not really, but we love it a lot. And today is beautiful. It's about mid-60s and sunny, both places we are at. And I really don't know what would hit the spot better than Ham's. Unfortunately, I live in a place where Ham's distribution is not reliable. So James, I'm tasking you with having one for me if you are deciding to partake in such activities today.
I will send you a Snapchat if I can find one.
Thank you so much.
And I will cherish it.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Animal Punditry. We enjoyed having you here. Love chatting about this stuff, zooming out and taking current affairs in the bigger context. And we look forward to chatting again about this stuff in a week or two.
Yeah. Next time we'll little China. We never talk about China.
Never. Spoilers.
We'll talk about China next time.
Heard it here first. Talk about China next time.
Have a good weekend, guys.